Good evening. Welcome to Scotland at 7 with me, Gordon Ross. It's the 22nd of March today. Joining me on the programme this evening, we have Julie Coombe, famous actor, Julie.
I wish.
Well, you're famous
Nice
to
to be
me,
here.
Julie, anyway. And
Oh,
also,
that's lovely.
also joining me in the studio this evening, well, not in the studio, but via a link, is of course James Dornan MSP. Welcome back to the programme, James.
Happy to be back, Gordon.
Okay, well, listen, we're going to get straight into the coronavirus update because there's a lot of news to get through tonight. The coronavirus update. As of 2 o'clock today, a total of 1,776,816 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and the UK Government's regional testing centre since the beginning of the pandemic. Of these, 1,562,928 have been confirmed negative, 213,888 have tested positive. There are 359 new confirmed cases of COVID-19. This, of course, is an underestimate of the number of cases because not everyone with the virus displays the symptoms, and not all those with the symptoms will be tested. There were no new reported deaths of people who have tested positive today. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by COVID-19 infections now stands at 7,552. This number only includes those who have died having received a positive test for the virus in the previous 28 days. Of the people who have tested positive, 353 were in hospital last night, 33 of whom were in intensive care. Now, as of 8 o'clock this morning, 2,182,400 people had received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccination and 225,096 had received their second dose. The latest UK daily figures today show that 26,172 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 17 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings and not just in hospitals. Now to tonight's main stories. The Hamilton report has cleared the First Minister. The independent report by Mr James Hamilton on the First Minister's self-referral under the Scottish Ministerial Code has been published. Mr Hamilton is a former Director of Public Prosecutions in Ireland and has been an independent advisor on the Code since January 2013, having been appointed by Alex Salmond when he was First Minister. He was asked to assess whether there had been any breach of the Code by the First Minister, the nature of any such breach, and if a breach had occurred, to advise on the appropriate remedy or sanction. Mr Hamilton looked at the following: the First Minister's meeting with Jeff Aberdeen on the 29th of March 2018, and meetings and telephone calls with Mr Salmond on the 2nd and the 23rd of April, 7th of June, 14th and 18th of July 2018. He'll also look at whether the First Minister misled Parliament about these meetings, whether the First Minister attempted to influence the conduct of the investigation, and whether the First Minister broke the Code by continuing with judicial review. On each point, he found the First Minister had not breached the Code, saying in his conclusions, paragraph 18.2 of the report, I am of the opinion, that the First Minister that the First Minister did not breach the provisions of the Ministerial Code in respect of any of these matters. Mr Hamilton's report, formally commissioned by the Deputy First Minister John Swinney, was delivered to the Scottish Government today. In line with the First Minister's commitment to Parliament, the report has been published on the day of receipt. The report is being published in full, except for information that needs to be excluded to comply with court orders in force to protect the identity of complainers. In the covering note, the report, Mr Hamilton has acknowledged that redactions will be necessary. James, if you don't mind, I'd like to come to you first of all. There have been so many accusations made against the First Minister in the last, 2 years or so, that it's difficult to know where to begin. But Mr Hamilton seemed pretty straightforward in his view that she's not guilty of any of these accusations, that she hasn't misled Parliament and doesn't need to resign.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anybody who was looking at this without a political hat on who really thought she was guilty of anything. I mean, I saw a tweet by Yanis Varoufakis, is that his name, that saying, I've looked and looked at this and I can't find what it is that she's meant to be guilty of. It's been a nonsense. It's been political games. The behaviour of the opposition parties on the committee that I report tomorrow morning has been nothing short of scandalous. And if there should be an inquiry, it should be into these members. Nicola Sturgeon has never shown any inclination to break the ministerial code as far as we are aware at any time in anything. And I don't think that anybody thought there was anything real substantial for her to answer to here. And for us to be spending so much time and so much money on this at the behest of the Tories and others, when we look down the road and see exactly what's going on in Westminster and in 10 Downing Street, and not a word from Douglas Ross or Murdo Fraser or Baroness Davidson or any of them. It shows you what this is what it always looked like, and that's trying to be a political fix, and it never worked.
James, one of the things that struck me about this entire procedure was that the First Minister herself referred herself to the ministerial inquiry so that she would be investigated. Those aren't the actions of somebody who's been deliberately misleading Parliament, surely.
Well, if they are, they're the actions of a very, very clever person that would put themselves up there feeling that the other people couldn't catch her. Of course, they're the actions of an innocent person. The First Minister knew that she hadn't broken the ministerial code, or she certainly knew that she hadn't broken it deliberately. And she went there, put herself up, 8 hours of questioning. I'd like to see any of that committee be put up with 8 hours of questioning, and they couldn't hit her once. So I think it was very clear from the offset that this was going to be the result of the QC's inquiry.
Well, obviously, it needed a legal brain to have a look at it dispassionately, and I don't think it could have been any more dispassionate. Julie, you've been listening to this conversation already so far tonight. What struck you, first of all, when you heard the news today? What was your first reaction to this?
Well, I was absolutely overwhelmingly relieved, but I'm glad to say not surprised, because I didn't think that the First Minister had broken the rules of her office. It's very interesting hearing James speaking about it, because he can speak about it with a lot of knowledge, with a lot of political knowledge. And I mean, I can only offer you an opinion of a punter, basically somebody who is very interested in politics. I make no bones about the fact that I am pro-Indy. I'm a member of the SNP, but I like to think that I'm a little bit across the whole political spectrum and know what's going on. But I over the weekend, myself and a few friends, mostly actors, I have to say, because there's an awful lot of actors in the independence movement, there were a lot of texts going around saying, "Oh my goodness, what will we do if anything happens to Nicola? What will we do?" And but really, we kind of talked each other around and said, "No, there's no way." I mean, I think, as I was finding it very hard as a lay person to see what she could possibly have been guilty of. I mean, I think it would need to have been this kind of tremendous Machiavellian, double, triple, even more of a bluff to put herself up there, thinking, "Oh, I'll hoodwink them," and all that. It obviously was the actions of an innocent woman to put herself up for investigation. But I am overwhelmingly relieved.
Well,
can I say that?
It's interesting that you say, all these accusations were made about this Machiavellian plot. Hamilton himself looked at each one of these, and he looked at the accusations that the First Minister knew that Mr. Salmond would be a target of this procedure before she signed off on it, and he found that was false. He then looked to see if the First Minister had broken the ministerial code by attempting to influence the investigation. He found that wasn't true either. And finally, he found that she didn't breach the code by misleading or intending to mislead Parliament. It just looks like every single argument that has been put against Nicola Sturgeon has crumbled. James, I know this is probably not a surprise to you, but it must be terrific news for the SNP going into the coming elections to have this finally laid to rest.
Yes, it's rebounded on those who have been trying to make political capital out of it. But I suspect the reason why the opposition parties released their opposition report, the committee report last week, is because they knew fine well that when somebody independent and dispassionate looked at the evidence, they were going to find that she hadn't broken the code. So they wanted a few days of headlines. They're going to try and get another one tomorrow, but the headlines should be on Wednesday. In a country that had a fair media, should be on Wednesday. Tories ridiculed for bringing a vote of no confidence in somebody who's already been found innocent of the charges. Can I just say, on the comments that Julie made, it's much more important that Julie says that she couldn't see what it was about than it is for me to say it. And I'm really pleased to hear somebody who is a member that calls herself a layperson in terms of this having the same conclusions as I have. Sometimes you get a bit too close to something, but I'm really glad to see that that she's relieved, that we all are, and that she felt that was the right result and always was going to be.
Okay, James, thank you. Julie, another interesting aspect of this entire affair, if you want to call it an affair, the fiasco that the unionist parties have tried to launch against the First Minister, is that there was an alleged leaking of Mr. Salmon's name to the Daily Record. Now, it struck me that when I heard this, I thought, well, if whoever leaked this information to the press was one of Nicola Sturgeon's friends or a minister in the government, the Daily Record would probably have been happy to announce that to the world, wouldn't they? But they haven't.
Yes. I mean, Gordon, you know that I've been going through a bit of a fiasco myself with our own union. With equity, and it's all been leaks and, all these sort of all subterfuge and everything.
Private briefings.
Yes, secret council meetings and all this kind of thing. And you can bet your bottom dollar that if the Daily Record had got a hold of that, then it would have been out there. I mean, I've found the whole thing really distasteful, I have to say. We speak about it a lot in the house, and my son, who's 25, he's also a member of the party, and and I think a rather lovely young man, should say myself.
Of course, yes.
A little bit biased, the mammy speaks. But just, he was saying it's the way that everyone will try and turn everything as if it suits their purposes, then they will condone anything. Absolutely anything. As James was saying earlier, you look down the road, you look at all the things that Boris Johnson's been up to, Dominic Cummings has been up to, Priti Patel, Matt Hancock, the list goes on and on and on. I mean, a lot of these people never held to any scrutiny, but that's all right. All right. I mean,
and they certainly wouldn't volunteer to refer themselves to a committee like this to be examined.
Absolutely. They just circle the wagons. I mean, Priti Patel paying off, but she was found to be in the wrong, and she £300,000 it's cost them, but still that's all right.
So they never said that she didn't bully anyone. They just settled it out of court, didn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And £300,000 is a pretty big statement.
A gagging bribe, if you like.
Yes, it's a fair amount of hush money, let's put it that way. But it's just the way that everything is for political capital. And I think that Nicola Sturgeon is, she's had a lot on her plate with the pandemic. I think she's been exemplary throughout. And the way that she conducted herself under those questions was just quite inspirational. I mean, I was quite tearful actually watching her, but I'm pleased for her. I know there's still things to come, but I'm so pleased for her that she's been vindicated. I just, I actually feel a bit tearful just now thinking about it, but it's the way that she seems to scare people so much because she's just really good at her job.
She certainly is. James, there's another aspect of this came out later. Well, it was actually this afternoon, just before we went on the air, and that was Henry McLeish comments that he made to Radio 4 this afternoon, where he actually seemed to support the First Minister, and not only that, but he condemned the Tories for trying to bring this no confidence deal, and has actually said that he felt the Labour Party should stand aside, and so should the Greens when it came to the vote. Is this, do you think, a little bit of a sign of things to come with the Labour Party? Do you think they've learned from what's happened to the Tories?
No. I'm delighted to hear what Henry McLeish said, but Henry doesn't really speak for the mainstream Scottish Labour Party anymore, does he?
No, I suppose not.
We've got in Anasawa somebody who is thorough to the union. I suspect tomorrow they won't vote on this, that they will probably abstain.
As is their usual way, isn't it?
Yes. Any difficult decisions, that's the way to do it. Stand behind your cause and keep your hands in your pockets. I expect him to abstain. I don't know what the Lib Dems will do. I think the Greens have now said that they're going to vote with the SNP. But It just makes the Tories look ridiculous. It just, how can you ask for a vote of no confidence? What they're really looking for is for Parliament to say she's guilty after an independent QC just said that she was innocent. And that's just utter nonsense. Can I just say, by the way, £1,000 that Priti Patel was fined, that could have paid for Boris Johnson's living room. And that's a terrible waste of money that had to go out in that.
Yeah, that's true. Well, certainly Mr. Hamilton's report runs to 61 pages. So far, I've actually only managed to read just over half of it. But the half that I have read is absolutely unequivocal that he believes that she has done nothing wrong whatsoever. And this entire episode appears to have been basically conjured up out of thin air by the Conservatives.
Yeah, not just by the Conservatives, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Can I say that what I hope will happen after this is that the Conservatives can make noises off and the Labour Party can do the same. Unionists do what unionists do.
Yep.
But I hope that it will quieten down those who, on the one hand, say they're independent supporters and support yes, but on the other hand, I'm doing everything that they possibly can to undermine the First Minister. And I really hope that is going to stop right now.
Well, we hope so. Julie, do you think this will see an end to the infighting that's been going on from within the ranks of the independence movement from a small but extremely loud minority?
I hope that they can, even if it doesn't go away completely, I hope that they can shelve it. I hope that they can just be bigger than they seem to be at the moment, and get us there. The fact that the party, that this tiny amount of people in the party are trying to pull, rip itself apart from within, is so upsetting to people like myself who have, wanted independence and campaigned for independence and, broken our hearts over not getting it in 2014 and all that. The fact that it feels within touching distance, and everyone is starting to, because as James said, it's not just the Tories that have pushed this. There's a toxicity within the party that has enabled this to happen as well. And I think, hold your water, even if it doesn't go away completely. Hold your water, achieve the goal, and then fight like rats in a sack. It won't be pretty, but if that's what they want to do, wait and do it. But I really hope so. But I know that, when you're dealing with personalities, I look at this as an actor as well. You're dealing with actors who want to be playing the main role, shall we say. Yeah,
they like to be in the public eye.
Yes, there is that, and who's got the biggest part, shall we say, and who's the lead, and there's a lot of that, and it is politics, is personalities as well. There's no doubt about it. But I'd really hope that they can just hold their water and get to the goal that we're all working towards, hopefully. And then
I'm a bit shocked that you're saying that politicians have got egos there, Julie. I mean, I'm kind of stunned by this.
James, you must be the exception to the rule.
Yes.
I would have thought, yeah.
Listen, we'll have to move on, I'm afraid, to our next story, so brace yourselves. Scottish exports have plunged after Brexit. A new report by the Food and Drink Federation has found that food exports to the European Union fell by more than 75% in January 2021. Products including whisky, beef and fish were among the worst affected, with salmon exports down by 98% in January 2020, according to the report. The drop has been attributed to non-tariff barriers faced by UK exporters and the collapse of groupage movements as a result of Brexit. Commenting, the SNP's Environment, Food and Rural Affairs spokesperson Deirdre Brock MP said, "These figures reveal the damage done to Scotland and its businesses by the Tory government's hard Brexit, neither of which we voted for." Now, James, obviously we didn't vote to have our industries decimated in this way, and I think we have all predicted this, and yet some voters apparently didn't seem to believe it. Well, they'll be believing it now, won't they?
Well, some of them still won't, of course, and they'll still think it was a price worth paying to take back control, I think the line was. There's nothing new here. There's nothing surprising here. This is what we all thought was going to happen. And all I can say is it was coming. It's horrible. In political terms, we've been shown to be on the right side again. We've been shown the importance of belonging to that big European group again. And I think that it will benefit us when we come up to the election. But it's a terrible price that the people of Scotland are having to pay because of xenophobia and a small group of people taking control, both political and financial control, down in London.
James, it'd been said before Brexit, before the end of the transition period, that for some Scots, it would take feeling the pain like this for them to realise that being an independent country is a far better future for us than being tied to this British state that's determined to trash our industries in the interests of their Brexit aspirations. Do you think that this will have that effect? Will people now, do you think, start to think, well, maybe I was wrong?
I think there's three things together, right? I think that the Brexit, the result of what happened today, so I'm going back to the last one very, very slightly, and the independence, the election and independence referendum that come after it are all closely linked, because during the pandemic, Scotland themselves showed that they can handle things on their own that are better than has been done from Westminster. Nicola showed that we've got a leadership that the rest of the UK can't compare with. And the people of Scotland have seen just the complete disdain in which we've been treated through the Brexit process, through the pandemic process, where a lot of the decisions that we would like to have made earlier we couldn't do because of decisions made down there. So I think that all feeds into that whole thing about A, they don't care about us, and B, we're more than capable of running our own affairs, and C, we'd be better in Europe than out of Europe. And I think that's going to play big dividends for us, first in the election, but I think maybe more importantly when it comes to the independence referendum.
Well, let's hope you're right, James. Julie, what I was going to ask you was that with these sales figures, and we're talking about, we now have proof, if it were needed, of how bad Brexit has been for Scotland. Do you think that the sort of political fog that was caused by COVID and the confusion and the conflation of the effects of the virus on one hand and Brexit on the other has actually concealed the truth about how bad Brexit will be for our exporting businesses?
I think that's possible. I mean, I think it was really interesting what James was saying about the three things all, being very closely linked and feeding into the next referendum, because I think he's absolutely right. And I think what's happened is that they've been desperate to find any kind of positive out of it, and at one point it was the vaccination stuff that was all the positive, that it's much better not to be in the EU. It was the only sort of Brexit success, and that's because to my mind, there is no Brexit success. So they've been really looking for something, and it was all really the EU won't let us have won't let anybody have vaccine, and I think that they have been doing quite a good job here. But it was the only Brexit success. I mean, I've always felt that we haven't wanted it. We never wanted it. I hope that now fewer people, even the ones that voted, that thought it would be a good idea here, I hope they're turning now. I mean, I just think that they're going to have to spend huge amounts of money and huge amounts of time negotiating back to where we were to have any kind of hope for the future, because really, we kind of had it as good as it got, if you know what I mean. And I just think that they're going to have to, civil servants are going to be spending a lot of time getting us back to where we were, and it's going to cost us a lot of money. It's just, to me, it's just an absolutely ridiculous thing, as James says, for xenophobia clothed in politics. I struggle with it.
Julie, one other aspect of this that you were mentioning there, that you said that we had it as good as it gets. Surely if we were independent, then it would get better, because we would be in charge of all of our revenues, all our taxes, all our oil revenues, all our import and export surpluses.
Yeah.
We could do a lot more trade with Europe, surely, if we were independent.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that is my opinion. I mean, I was just saying, before, when people were saying, honestly, I hadn't realised that Europe was a problem for most people until it became one after, David Cameron allowed himself to be noised up by the very far right. But what I was meaning was, if that was the state, if that was the status that we were in as the UK, as a united country, that was as good as it gets, if you know what I mean, being part of the EU and having all the, single market and everything. But yes, I agree, Gordon, that I think it would be much, much better to be in charge of our own affairs and in charge of our own destiny. And we just seem to, Scotland looks out rather than looks in, and that's the kind of person I am, and that's why the politics of the SNP appeal to me, and I think that's where we should be going.
Okay, James, before we leave this subject of the drop in exports and so on, I was going to ask you a question about this. When Brexit was originally in the throes of going ahead, but before the vote, it was sold to the British people really as a nostalgia trip back to the 50s, when Britain was an island and we'd won the war and we were terrific. But when it came to the Scottish referendum on independence, we were accused of being jingoistic and nostalgic for the past, when in actual fact what we were really asking for was a decision made by the head, not the heart, about business, about exports, about our ability to make our way in the world. Do you think that argument is now beginning to coalesce? Do you think people are beginning to see the difference between what Brexit has done and what independence will do?
A good starting point is always to listen to what Westminster says and then realise the opposite's happening, because they are the most deceitful government that I have ever come across. They got Brexit through just concentrating solely on immigrants, on bringing on a sense of Englishness that never really existed. And you talk about back to the 50s. Nostalgia for the 50s is fine if you're a huge Coronation Street fan and you don't watch anything else. But the reality is the 50s was a horrible place for many, many people in this country. It might have been fine for them, and England had just won the war on their own, and so that might have been all well and good. But the people that were born in it and lived through it and were brought up in single ends and stuff like that, they didn't think that the 50s was a great place. Unfortunately, too many people are going back to live in the 50s type of lifestyle instead of moving on from it and making life better. So just, as I would say, always be careful of what comes out of a Tory's mouth.
Well, I was hearing today the news that there's a planned statue to be erected to the memory of Vera Lynn on the White Cliffs of Dover, and I think that gave me a pause today when I heard that.
That is brilliant. Oh, God, I'm proud to be British.
Julie, sorry,
Uh-huh.
did you have a point to make, Julie?
No, about
About theatre.
the industry that doesn't exist at the
Yes,
moment.
the invisible industry, Julie. The one that I failed to mention there.
Is it about me touring the sort of differences of touring in the UK, shall we say?
Yes, compared to touring in Europe, Julie, and
touring
how
in
how much we're missing out. How our artists could be, abroad in shows. They could be performing at festivals and so on.
I don't think people have any idea how much people in my industry work in Europe. I really don't. And a brilliant friend of mine, John Sampson, who's a musician as well as an actor, he has been during lockdown. And the whole year, he's been putting these amazing photographs of the places that he's worked, and you're just like, my goodness, John, there's nowhere that you haven't worked. All these interesting places, all these amazing. There's a photograph of him having to, under duress, shake Kurt Waldheim's hand, and I was like, oh, okay, and it sparked a story that when I did some teaching in Vienna, and which involved a bit of a performance as well. And my friend who was the teacher there, who'd invited me out, had said, oh, the boy who's doing the lights for you is Kurt Waldheim's grandson, and that's his daughter in the front row there. And there was this woman with a wee dog under her arm, with this very Thatcher-like hair. And it was quite kind of terrifying, actually. It was a terrifying hairdo. But John has just illustrated to me how much this is going to impact on our work, and he's been campaigning because Brexit is just going to, we have to have free movement, and the guy who's now the GS of our union was a Brexiteer, and he campaigned for Vote Leave, and it doesn't quite add up to us.
That must jibe with the membership greatly.
It's really, really hard. Yeah, and a lot of people don't realise that, but it's going to impact hugely on our industry. And I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do. They're supposed to be campaigning for a passport for us to be able to travel about. But basically, every actor I know that can get an Irish passport is getting an Irish passport at the moment.
I was going to say, Julie, of course, students are affected as well because Erasmus is no longer available. In fact, one of my own young relatives, I think, is going to be one of the last Erasmus, or have one of the last opportunities to go on an Erasmus course, and that will be it.
It's ridiculous, actually. When I had the privilege of meeting Nicola Sturgeon once, and it was my son was abroad on the Erasmus programme, and he would tell you now that has been one of the best years of his life. He was in Leipzig. And he used some of his Erasmus money to come back and vote in the general election. And the First Minister very kindly did a wee video and thanked him. He was over the moon, absolutely. Him and all his pals. She was just great. But
I can't imagine Boris Johnson doing that for one of his voters.
No, this is the thing. She was so natural. She was saying, "Oh, could you thank her?" She went, "No, if you got your phone, I'll just do I'll do a wee video for you." And I was like, "Oh, could hardly press the button and everything." And she was brilliant. But my son Harrison, he would tell you that has probably been one of the best years of his life, and it's just criminal that's going to stop. It won't stop. It's just going to be a lot more difficult and a lot more expensive.
Well, maybe one day we'll get Erasmus back fairly soon, I hope. Anyway, unfortunately, we need to move on to the next story. And over £40 million is to be made available for zero-emission buses. The Scottish Government has awarded £40.5 million through a second round of Scottish Ultra-Low Emission Bus Scheme, or SULEBs. This is the largest investment yet through the SULEBs programme and will support operators in replacing 215 old diesel buses with new battery electric models. This is a substantial increase on the 57 buses supported through the first round, and to help meet the demand, the intended budget for this second round has been increased by £15 million. With 172 of the buses to be built in Falkirk, this investment supports skilled green manufacturing jobs in Scotland, as well as reducing transport emissions. The Scottish Government has also published new information and an ideas pack which shows the bus and finance sectors and shows how they are innovating to speed up the transition to net zero. This is the first report from the Bus Decarbonisation Task Force, which brings together senior leaders from the energy, bus and finance sectors to co-design a pathway to a fully decarbonised bus fleet. The information pack identifies new routes for financing green buses that can build on government support and bring about faster fleet transformation. James, this is an excellent story, surely. I mean, the Scottish Government is doing what it said it would do and is supporting not only the decarbonisation of the bus fleet, but is also supporting the jobs of bus manufacturers in Falkirk. I cannot see anything bad about this at all. In fact, surely they want to keep expanding this programme.
Well, it's a great programme, and it's another perfect example of a government that's getting on with the day job. Whilst everything else is happening, while the pandemic's going on, whilst we've been criticised for this, that and the other, our departments continue to do good work alongside their colleagues in local government. And the environmental services, it's a fantastic piece of work. And I mean, Glasgow to many extents has been a front runner in a lot of the green work that's going along around traffic and transport. So yeah, it's great news, and I would expect it to continue to expand over the years, and it'll expand even further once we have the powers to do it ourselves.
James, I've thought for many years that as well as bus manufacturing, because we've got Dennis and company over in Falkirk manufacturing these buses, there surely must be a need now in Scotland to develop our own car manufacturing. Do you think that's a possibility for an independent Scottish nation?
Listen, one step at a time, Gordon. For goodness sake, tomorrow we'll be getting the Tories saying, why is there no car manufacturing in Scotland? But
it's Nicola's fault.
Yeah, there'll be another inquiry. All of these things are things that you would get the opportunity to look at in an independent Scotland that you can't possibly get the opportunity to look at just now. I'm not saying that we'd be able to go back to those glory days, but there certainly is the opportunity to invite investment in when you've got the powers to make sure that investment is going to get its rewards and going to do what it's intended to do.
Okay. Julie, I don't know about you. I live in Glasgow, and Hope Street in Glasgow was one of the worst air quality figures of anywhere in Scotland at one time, and it was mostly due to diesel buses idling at bus stops all the way up Hope Street. This is exactly what we want, isn't it? All of that bus fleet converted from diesel to electric. The city's streets will be free of diesel smoke and the fumes forever. It would be fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm very, very sort of eco and all that. We're into recycling and stuff. I think it's partly my husband grew up in Germany, and you remember being on holiday there, and they had all these bins and everything. And John was like very excited about recycling, but. Yeah, I think we have to be at the forefront of I heard it described as the green industrial revolution, and I think that's a really kind of positive term. I mean, I remember when my kids were wee, I would take like my oldest son in the pushchair into town, and I'm talking about into Edinburgh, and I suddenly became really aware of how his wee face was just at sort of exhaust level, and I became really, really aware of all the fumes, and like you're saying about Hope Street in Glasgow, I mean, it was just that was the one thing that everybody knew about it. It's the most polluted sort of thing, and I think it's a really exciting thing to be as positive about your future. Putting that money into putting the £40 million into it, and I was reading as well that they're hoping that the buses will be ready to go into service at the
COP26.
The conference. Yeah. Yes, and
that would be wonderful.
Brilliant, yeah. What better platform? So no, I think anything green is good.
It certainly is. I'm wondering, James, have
Yeah,
you got
that's
anything
helpful.
else to add to this? Sorry, James, I was just going to say to you, with the bus fleet, sort of gradually expanding and the diesel buses being removed, surely now that the Scottish industries have now got to really focus on generating more green renewable energy to actually propel all of these vehicles, because they're going to be taking electricity out of the grid. We need more green energy in, don't we?
Yeah, but we're going back to the same thing all the time, that this becomes much easier once we have all the powers to do that. Once we can change our tax system to more efficiently benefit the environmental industries than the more traditional industries. I mean, there is work being done, but again, until we have all those powers, we're working with one hand tied behind our back. I know I keep on going back to independence, but independence is just all that is it's a key that opens the door to let us do all the other things that we started doing, but really need all the powers to finish.
Well, let's hope we get those keys soon, James, and actually manage to open the door and start doing all of these things as we hope to do. Now, moving to our next story now, a new poll has shown that 52% of Scots support yes. A new poll shows that voters trust the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon to lead Scotland's recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic, with a majority of Scots, 52% of us, saying that they would vote yes in an independence referendum. The BMG research poll for the Herald shows the SNP 27 points ahead on Holyrood voting intentions on 48%, with the Tories trailing on 21% and Labour on just 20%. The poll also reveals that the vast majority of Scots, 57%, think the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has handled the coronavirus pandemic well, compared to just 24% for Boris Johnson. The SNP Deputy Leader, Keith Brown, said, "It's clear that people in Scotland believe they have the right to choose a better future as an equal independent country, rather than being subjected to a Tory government which risks our economic recovery and threatens our NHS." Julie, let me come to you with this. Now, this is another poll. This, I think, must be something like the 24th poll or something like that, which puts independent support above 50%. Do you think we're starting to see a rebound now in the poll figures? There had been a slight dip recently during the entire sort of fiasco with the Salmond inquiry. Do you think we're beginning to see a recovery now?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, to hear John Curtis about independence being the settled will of the people, really interesting. But given that he was so again it, shall we say? But
he was a skeptic. I think it's fair to say. Yeah.
Yes, yes, objective political voice, I suppose. But it's obviously that poll's in the Herald, so I'm inclined to think it might be a few more people who are pro. I hope so. But there's been a lot of polls now, and I think if it did dip, it was only like a couple of percent or something. Yeah. But there's been so much support actually for the SNP and for the First Minister in particular over what she's had to endure lately, that I think it has actually backfired on some of the people that have instigated it. But I think people are just kind of, I think it's about you're having to go over a kind of fear and almost allowing yourself to grow up as a country and confidence. And I think we are finding that slowly. Some of us found it sooner, and what we have to do is kind of take everybody with us. And that's what I want to do. But yes, every poll that comes in saying support for yes is more than support for no is a good in my book.
Okay, Julie, thank you. James, one of the things that I noticed, particularly from this poll, was actually the voting intentions for the Holyrood elections, with the SNP on 48% and the Tories trailing on 21%. I think from the previous poll that I've seen, that's actually an increase for the SNP of at least 1 or 2% over the Tories, isn't it?
Yeah. The way things are going, particularly after today, and we've got this mess out the road, and we were talking earlier on about hopefully people will reflect a wee bit about how best to get independence. I could see us getting a majority on May the 6th. things have to go according to, go right according to the way we want them to go.
Mm-hmm.
But the public, certainly the public will for us to do well is there. We will run a strong, positive campaign as we always will. I think that some of the opposition parties have put themselves in a particularly bad light over the last few months, and I am hoping that we will see a positive result. I also think that the Greens are going to do quite well this time. So at the end of the election in May, I think there might be quite a substantial lead for independent supporting parties in Scottish Parliament.
It certainly looks that way based on the polls that we're seeing. It's also interesting that the vast majority of Scots, that's 57%, think that Nicola Sturgeon handled the pandemic better than Boris Johnson. Did that surprise you?
I'd like to know who the other 43% were then. Honestly.
Okay, well, let's move to the next story then. Now, the draft referendum bill has now been published. A draft independence referendum bill has been published to give the people of Scotland the right to decide their future once the current health crisis is over. The Constitution Secretary Michael Russell said the draft bill is being brought forward to offer Scotland the choice of who is best to lead the country's post-pandemic recovery, the people who live here or a government based in Westminster. The draft Scottish Independence Referendum Bill sets out a number of key issues for voting, including the timing of a referendum, which should be a matter for the next Scottish Parliament to decide. Ministers have separately made it clear that it should take place once the public health crisis is over. The question, should Scotland be an independent country, is the same one used in the 2014 referendum, and it will be tested by the Electoral Commission. Voting eligibility will be extended to match the franchise at Scottish Parliament and local government elections. The draft bill has been published on the Scottish Government's website. It will be for a future Scottish Government to consider whether it formally introduces a bill in the Scottish Parliament. Last year, the Scottish Parliament passed the Referendum Scotland Act 2020, which sets out the detailed conduct and campaign rules that can be used for any referendum. The Referendum Scotland Act incorporated the Scottish franchise, meaning that 16-year-olds and foreign nationals with voting rights in devolved elections will be eligible to vote. The questions used in referendums will be tested by the Electoral Commission to establish that they are clear, transparent and neutral. So, Julie, let me take your view first. Now, this has been trailed for a while that the SNP was going to pre-publish this bill before Parliament breaks up for the election. Are you glad to see this finally being laid out in black and white? Is it about time?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think it's a really, really difficult one for the Scottish Government because, everybody, obviously we've been going through this pandemic and that has been foremost in everybody's mind. And whilst dealing with the huge spectre of Brexit as well. But there's always this undercurrent in the independence movement is when's it going to be? When's it going to be? When they're forgetting all about independence, and I don't think that is the case. I think it's really difficult trying to please everybody. You just can't do it. Mm-hmm. So I think it's like a good move, and it's also not one that could be accused of being underhand at all, of trying to slip anything past.
No, it's very transparent, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I mean, it's ridiculous having to kind of try and cover all the bases because you'll never do it. You just can't. You can't do it. There'll always be someone who says, usually a Tory, that says, this is wrong and these are the reasons it's wrong, you can't have it, but I think it's really interesting, again very exciting, and as you say, it's transparent, and I'm really keen to hear what James has got to say about it. I think timing will be crucial, and yeah, I think a lot of people will be very pleased to see it.
I dare say they will. James, are you very pleased?
Oh, no, I'm not that bothered. A couple of years ago, I don't know if you remember that when I put my name down for the deputy leadership, one of the things I was saying was that we had to go into this election with one of two things, either having had the referendum, this was before COVID obviously, or with a set time to have it. This just sets it perfectly. And my belief had always been that what we would do is we'd win the election. Well, the plan would be that we'd win the election, we'd request a horrible word, that a Section 30, and if we were refused, we would then have the referendum on our own terms because the Scottish Parliament had given us the power for it. And that's exactly what's happened. The one bit you missed out in your introduction to it, Gordon, was that the expectation is that this will take place in the first half of the Parliament.
Right.
So that narrows down to a great extent what we will be coming into the Parliament with. We couldn't have it during the pandemic. Nobody would have been happy with that, except for the diehards who will have it any given day, no matter what the circumstances are. But we want to win it, not.
James, would you say that the phrase that was used was that it will be up to the Parliament that's elected in May to decide when the referendum will be? Does that then, do you think, diffuse that situation potentially where the unionist parties, for want of a better word, can attack it based on the date and say, well, the COVID-19 pandemic isn't over? Do you think that will go some way towards, battling that?
It gives us the flexibility for when we come into power to have it at a time that is right for the people of Scotland. And what I mean by that is you're not taking away resources whilst you're in the middle of fighting the most dangerous thing that's happened to our country, certainly since the Second World War. So you have to give a new Parliament. You don't want to tie the new Parliament down to a certain date of your making, but give them that flexibility to say, this is what is expected of you, this is the time scale in which it's expected, and it's for you to decide when exactly it's going to happen. I think this covers, for most people who want an independence referendum or want independence, I think this covers most of the bases. And I think that when people look at it, they'll see that this covers it. There'll be some who will say, no, we should have said that we're going to have it on the 18th of September, or whatever. But the reality is we've given ourselves enough cover. We've shown that we are deadly serious about this. Yeah. One of the things that upsets me most about politics over the last few years is the suggestion that people like Nicola and John Swinney and Bruce Crawford and Mike Russell and all these people who have been fighting for independence for decades didn't want it because they wouldn't have the referendum in the middle of a pandemic. That's insanity.
James, James, a question which arises from all of this about the timing of this. If we're having this referendum when the public health crisis is over, we've heard mentioned by various politicians of the idea that we might be able to go down to level 1 lockdown or even level 0 if things go according to plan by around the end of June, beginning of July. Do you think perhaps that Boris Johnson might try to delay getting to that stage to try and put off the date at which the Scottish Government will decide to hold the referendum?
My concern would be if it was English vote. Not that Johnson was trying to put off the date, but that he lets people go holidays abroad, they come back and they never get to that level. That would be my real concern. I think that he's so desperate to show the people of England, let's be honest, he doesn't really care about any of the rest of us, that England is a safe place again and that people can come in and do business. I don't think he would do anything to delay the going down to what are considered to be safe levels.
So you think that he's not going to hold it back in order to just frustrate the Scots' will to have an independence referendum?
For us, the independence referendum is a huge thing. For him, it's a thing. He's got a lot of other things that he's trying to contend with. We're much better at that. We've just shown that. We're talking about the green buses and how we've handled the pandemic. But for us, certainly in an SNP government, we know that independence is going to make our country better. He doesn't see that independence or that the fight for independence is the most important thing in his agenda.
Okay. Julie, we talked about the idea of timing of this referendum. Do you have a view on when you would like the referendum to be?
I'm not one of these diehards who, as James was saying, right tomorrow, that's it,
Yeah.
regardless of anything. I think it has to be really properly considered, because it's not. It's more important actually that you get the timing right, probably for the people that don't want it, because
Yeah.
it's them who are going to be most vocal about it. And I think if you rush into anything, it's going to be, you're going to be accused of diminishing the pandemic or diminishing not doing the day job. I mean, if I never hear that phrase again, it'll be too soon. Yeah, I just got on with the day job, not doing the day job. I mean, it's an utterly
Yeah.
ridiculous thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it will have to be. I would be so interested to be in on the cabinet meetings as we
Yeah.
were discussing it,
To be a fly on the
because
wall.
absolutely it's just going to be that. I think that is probably the most important thing. And like I say, you'll never please all the people, but I think soonish, shall we say, soonish, but
Soonish. Okay.
soonish, yeah,
Soonish.
yeah. But
Jay,
yeah, let's get the pandemic out the way first.
okay. James, a final comment from you. I was just thinking there that the Tories went ahead with the Brexit cliff edge in the middle of the pandemic, didn't they? They didn't stop for the pandemic and say we want an extension to the transition period. They just went off the cliff edge. Are we always having to play by the rules and they don't? It never feels fair, does it?
Let's be fair, 300 odd years, it's never been fair, so that's why it never feels fair. The rules do not apply to Westminster. That was a whole empire thing, and we're still living in we're living in the dying days of Empire 2, I think. The rules don't apply equally. Scotland and the others have to obey the rules that are imposed by Westminster, and therefore Westminster don't need to obey those rules. That's how it's been. That's how it'll always be until such times as we're no longer part of it.
So not so much, do as I do, but do as I say.
Oh, that's Westminster rule for you in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Okay, well, on that strange note, I'm afraid we've run out of time for this evening. But let me just remind you that Broadcasting Scotland is, of course, running a big crowdfunder at the moment. If you'd like to get involved in Broadcasting Scotland and support us with a regular contribution each month, or if you'd like to make an individual donation or even volunteer, you can do all of those things by following the link at the bottom of your screen now. But it just remains for me to thank my two guests, James Dornan, MSP, and Julie Coombe, and wish you all a very good evening. Thanks for all of us.
Thank you.
What distinguishes Broadcasting Scotland from a website or blog, apart from our brilliant programmes,
Hi there, I'm Gordon Ross.
are the costs we face to enable us to produce those programmes. These costs are significant and ongoing. However, our facilities are able to do so much more if only we had the staff. In the last year, some of our supporters have cancelled their subscriptions. In one way, we would prefer it if it was because they didn't like us, rather than it being because of the financial pressures which we are all under because of COVID. The really positive outcome of our fundraiser is that at a time of economic challenge in Scotland, we will use your donations to create jobs and in a small way contribute to improving the Scottish economy. If you want us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster, able to provide an alternative mainstream television platform, then please support us.
Scotland is going to be an independent country.
Just imagine what we could do if we had even 1% of the BBC Scotland channel's budget. Imagine. And then please consider turning your imagination into reality. Please support us if you can afford it.